My name is Amy Singer. I'm a member of the Department of Middle Eastern and African History at Tel Aviv University, and I am a scholar of Ottoman Studies and Turkish history. Our first panel this afternoon will look at the AKP and the domestic arena. Before I continue, could I ask everyone please to check that their cell phone is in fact off? Thank you. We have 3 speakers on this panel, and they will each speak for 20 minutes, and then we will have a discussion in the remaining time, and I'm sure that they will stick to the time limits so that there will be time for discussion. Our first speaker is Professor Henri Barkey from Lehigh University. He is the Bernard and Bertha Cohen Professor in the Department of International Relations there. But he's also had a wide experience outside the university. He's worked as a member of the U.S. State Department policy planning staff, working primarily on issues related to the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean, and intelligence. He has also taught at Princeton University, Columbia, the State University of New York, and at the University of Pennsylvania. And in addition to these different appointments, he has served as a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace as part of their Middle East program. He is a prolific author. Among his publications are a book entitled Turkey's Kurdish Question with Graham Fuller, and Reluctant Neighbor, Turkey's Role in the Middle East, a question that was already raised here in the introduction by Amos Yadlin. His most recent publication is, I think, a co-edited title, Iraq, Its Neighbors, and the United States. Henri, please.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to the INSS and to Galia for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was here actually in January this year, so it's nice to be back. What I've been asked to do is to talk about the rise of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the AKP. So what I would like to do, and it's what I'm going to say is probably not going to be too much of a surprise to most of you, but let's say that if there was one sentence that would summarize the rise and consolidation of the AKP, it is that nothing succeeds like success. And this is a party that's been actually very successful. But it is also at the cusp of interesting changes in Turkey, in the sense that Turkey is now moving increasingly towards a one-party, and some people say even a one-man state. And the AKP has won election after election, and I don't see any reason why it won't win more elections in the future. So it's here to stay, and it's going to be like the LDP in Japan, which had a very, very long stay in power. But I would venture to say that the AKP is far more interesting, far more colorful, and far more amusing than the LDP. And for us, for social scientists like me, this is actually manna from heaven. I mean, it's job security, and it's fun. What accounts for the success? And basically, I would group the causes of the success in 3 different categories. They don't neatly split into 3 categories. There's a lot of, shall we say, collinearity, as the decision would say, so a lot of influence from one category to another. But the 3 are essentially structural changes that took place in Turkey that are independent of the AKP, independent of Erdogan. Number 2 is AKP and Erdogan's governance policies, both domestic and international. And 3, the weakness, or non-existence, if you want, of serious opposition to the AKP, or structurally, the absence of opposition in Turkey. And in conjunction with that, the mistakes that the military has made over the years. And I don't say this as somebody who supports the military, but I think the military, as you will see in my comments, had a very negative influence on the development of Turkish politics. So let me start with the first, the structural changes that occurred that are independent of Erdogan and the AKP. And of course, at the top of this is the structural transformation of the Turkish economy, which started in the 1980s. It started with Turgut Özal soon after the military coup of 1980. In fact, actually started just before the coup of 1980 and continued during the military regime. And then when Özal became prime minister, that continued. And the structural transformation was actually not an easy process. It was a long, arduous process with lots of ups and downs, lots of crises, and intervention by the IMF, by the outside donor countries. But it was a structural transformation that turned Turkey from an inward-oriented economy to what now it is, a real manufacturing powerhouse. Not just in Israel, but if you go to Europe, you see the impact of this manufacturing power that Turkey has become. And it did this because Turkey opened itself up. And in the process, I should say, the Europeans also helped. I mean, the customs union agreement of 1995 with Europe, although the Turks have complained bitterly about the imbalance in trade between Turkey and Europe, the fact of the matter is it gave the Turkish industry an opening to Europe where the Turks essentially learned to compete and to produce products that are first rate and therefore can be sold. If you can sell it in Europe, you can sell it anywhere, as Frank Sinatra would say. But that's one of the changes. The other change, which is very fundamental to this, is a socioeconomic change that accompanied this structural transformation. And that is, of course, the emergence of the proverbial Anatolian tigers, the emergence of a new business class that is pious, conservative, but not in Istanbul, not in Izmir, in the towns like Malatya, Kayseri, and the rest. But these were new businesses that were not encumbered by state support, state dependence on the state, like Istanbul business had been. And in some ways, one can argue that these as pious and as Islamist, as conservative as they were far more modern in outlook and approach than the Istanbul-based businesses for whom modernity was, yes, we want to be part of Europe, yes, we are Western-oriented, but was very much wedded to the status quo, both politically and economically, which meant that they relied on the state and on state help, and also suppression and protectionism. So fundamentally, I would say the outside changes and all of these happened before the AKP came to power. And when the AKP came to power, it took over essentially an economy that was about to take off. And the economy did take off. And if you look at export figures for post-2002, it is actually quite astounding. It's almost an exponential increase in Turkish exports. But AKP had nothing to do with it in some ways. What they did, however, is that they, as I will argue in a minute, is that they didn't mess it up. They did not institute policies that undermined this growth. And on the contrary, they helped it, as I will say. So, okay, so this is the outside changes that took place. What about the AKP? First of all, the genius of the AKP was to build a modern party in every sense of the word. By modern party, it was a mixture of using technology and meaning computers and very advanced polling methods, but also old-fashioned political organization, which means during elections going door to door, organizing people, making sure people went to the ballot box, knowing exactly what people needed in different localities, in different hamlets. And here, one of the things that it's important to understand that Erdogan had a huge advantage when he essentially re-entered politics in 2002, 2003. And that is, he had been the mayor of Istanbul. Now, Istanbul, first of all, being a mayor of such a huge, cosmopolitan, diverse place is a challenge in of itself. And by any stretch, I mean, everybody will tell you that it was a very successful stretch of when he was mayor. the city improved. He actually he learned essentially how to respond to local concerns and what individuals or small groups of people wanted. And the other advantage of being the mayor of Istanbul is that Istanbul is a city where everybody from Turkey ultimately migrates to and settles there and then forms communities on the basis of where they come from. They come from Balıkesir or Kayseri or you name them. So they live. But so if you do well, the word travels back to where these people came from, saying, oh, this guy's done a good job. So Erdogan essentially had the experience of running a place in a way in which other Turkish politicians who come from a bureaucratic background had no idea. Of course, the other thing is that he, just as the stuff he learned in Istanbul, he carried it to the national government. And one of the first things they did was actually to bring in some competent administration to Ankara. And you see that a great deal of the narrative and the discourse of the AKP is really based on service. And this is a change, because in Turkey, the public servant, the government official has always been above the citizens. And what Erdogan did was to reduce that distance. I'm not saying it's completely eliminated, but to reduce that distance, to make the bureaucrat closer to the average citizen, where the average citizen is not afraid of the bureaucrat who, like in the Ottoman times, was God. Second, new initiatives, especially in healthcare and education, that went straight to what people really wanted. New forms of getting prescriptions, new forms of school books being distributed for free, all these things that appealed to people. Third, the embrace of globalization. Albeit in a globalization in Turkish terms, in conservative, maybe pious terms to some extent, but the embrace of globalization that went also very well along with good economic steering and understanding what you needed to have competent economic policies. And here, the Anatolian Tigers became the backbone, if you want, of the AKP, and the AKP understood very well that it needed to support those businesses, because not only they created jobs, not only they brought prosperity, but also these people would ultimately fund the party, give and vote for the party. And unlike the opposition that doesn't understand how business works, a lot of AKP leaders, including Erdogan himself, came from a background of commerce, so they understand. Fourth, foreign policy. Foreign policy is not a determinant. People don't, like the United States maybe, people don't vote on the basis of foreign policy, but it was the icing on the cake. Because with everything else that was going on, the prosperity, the economic growth, Turkey feeling resurgent again, foreign policy became a way for the Turks to claim a role in the world. I mean, this is not a panel on foreign policy, so I'm not going to go into foreign policy, but let me just say in this context that Erdogan put Turkey or carved for Turkey a place in the global discourse, and that has given the Turks a great deal of satisfaction and pride. Finally, his charisma. I mean, there's no question that this is a guy who knows how to talk to the public, who can address the public, and has a connection with the public in a way in which very few politicians did since the beginning of the Republic, probably with the exception of Özal. So the third category, the opposition and the military. The AKP understood that the Kemalist state was becoming far too oppressive, far too intrusive in people's lives, and in part because AKP's rank and file comes from essentially people who were very much victims, if you want, of the Kemalist state. They continuously played with trying to weaken the Kemalist traditions and the Kemalist strictures. By contrast, the opposition, the CHP, is really stuck in the 1930s. It's really stuck, and its only platform, I mean, its only clear vision, so to say, is the defense of secularism at a time when it is not an issue that people care about. Now, Turkey has always been a center-right country. I mean, if you look at poll results over the years, you find that Turks tend to vote for center-right parties. Even when the center-right is divided, they vote for center-right parties. The Social Democrats have a smaller base, and the best they have done was in 1977, I think, when they got 40% of the vote. But that was really an aberration. So you already have a center-right country. So the political party that calls itself Social Democrat has essentially seen its share of the vote be reduced to a bare minimum, which is about 20%, 20 to 22%. And it's stuck there. It's not going to move from there because it has nothing to say on healthcare. It has nothing to say on economic policy. Even when you look at foreign policy, its reaction is knee-jerk, accusing the government of becoming a tool of the Americans in Syria. And this kind of discourse does not help the CHP. So from that perspective, the CHP is not going to go anywhere and is going to be stuck there. And also the composition of the party. When you look at the party, it tends to come, whether it's the MPs or the leadership, tends to come from classes that have very little to do with the bulk of the population. And you know, their way of campaigning is to get on television and shout and hope that people will vote for them. Yes, 20% will vote no matter what, but that's why they'll be. Are you going to hit me with this? Oh. So, you know, in a way, the tragedy of Turkey is that you have a party that is, and I'll do some criticism in a minute, but you have a party that is successful, but that party needs an opposition, and there is no opposition at the moment. If there is any opposition today to the AKP, it doesn't come from the traditional political parties. It comes from the Kurds, and it comes from the Fethullah Gülen organization. But I'll say a few things about this at the end. Okay. So the other, if you want, culprit in all of this, to the extent that we can look for lack of opposition and is the military. The military, first of all, undermined the natural development of the Turkish political system. The moment they intervened in 1960, they created this dependency or this expectation that the military would intervene every time there was a problem, and in a way gave the Turkish politicians a way out. I mean, that they didn't really have to work very hard, because if they really messed up, somebody was going to clean up the mess after them, so they could be responsible. And this is what really happened. But in the process, the military also assumed that it was infallible, that whatever it did, people would support it. They believed their own propaganda, essentially, about how much they were liked by the public. And in the process, they became very, very arrogant. And in the process, they started to make huge, huge tactical and strategic mistakes. And the strategic mistake, the most important strategic mistake, was not understanding that there was a reaction to military interventions, and there was a reaction to a severe implementation of Kemalism and especially secularism, that there was a reaction to the war in the southeast, but they didn't understand that. And finally, it took essentially 2007, an election that was fought on the basis of really military intervention in politics. When the military said Abdullah Gül cannot become president, Erdogan called and the AKP called their bluff. They went for elections, and the military essentially lost. But in the process, now you have in Turkey a military that is in between and that has no that created essentially a vacuum because politicians, especially the opposition, always relied on the military to resolve. So there is no effective opposition because the opposition was so dependent on the military. And also this is a military that is very politicized, that is not necessarily equipped to take on the major national security. So finally, just to think, but we are, and I mean, Joe is going to talk about this, the upshot of this is now you have a one-state party. Erdogan is going to become president one way or the other, and you are seeing the beginning of the emergence of a new deep state in Turkey, where the justice system essentially is still the tool by which the opposition and people who want to oppose are being dealt with. And the justice system in Turkey is the same justice system that the military created, and it is the same justice system that today is putting the military officers ironically in jail, but it is a justice system that has very little resemblance to normal justice system. And let me finish with one sentence. I mean, I've argued elsewhere that Turkish justice is to justice what military music is to music. So there is a semblance of justice, but ain't justice. Thank you.